Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox backing in with Matt Kelly for another episode of the award-winning Compliance Into the Weeds. Today, we take up continued efforts by the Trump administration to denude the federal government of its enforcement that we've seen in the past. Matt, where do we even begin?
Tom, I gotta ask first off, is denude the proper verb here? I was thinking neutered. I don't know. What is the right verb for what's going on? Are they denuded?
It
Are they,
can
I,
it could be denuded and neutered. Maybe
I,
that's the double trouble we've been looking for.
that may be. That's quite an image we've all conjured up now. Anyways, there's been a lot that has been going on. I will take them in sequence. Late last week, the newly sworn in Attorney General, Pam Bondi, she arrived at the Justice Department and then promptly issued a flurry of policy memos. That is not unexpected. However, the contents of the memos, most notably for corporate corruption and corporate compliance officers, are that number one, she said she was going to de-emphasize enforcement of the FCPA and really only focus on FCPA cases that somehow track with the department's new number one priority, which is drug cartels, transnational gangs, human trafficking. Um, there are some other issues and enforcement priorities we could talk about later on. But really, for corporate compliance officers, the big news is a shift away from enforcing FCPA violations involving corporate bribery, which, let's remember, that is what the FCPA was founded on and enacted for 50 years ago. But whatever, we're not doing that anymore. Instead, she said she would only enforce FCPA cases or investigate FCPA cases that really tied very clearly to cartels, drug cartels, other criminal cartels, transnational gangs, human trafficking, fentanyl importation. Honestly, I am not clear what sort of fact pattern could emerge that would connect an FCPA violation with a bribery of a foreign government official to a transnational gang. But I bet people in Latin America probably could tell us what that might look like. But really, a big de-emphasis on the FCPA, a big de-emphasis on sanctions against Russia. Again, no surprise there, considering the on again, off again man crush that Donald Trump seems to have with Vladimir Putin. But that was Thursday and Friday. Then on Friday and Saturday, over in the banking enforcement world, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, number one, announced that it had a new acting director in the form of Russell Vought. He is the director of the Office of Management and Budget. That is essentially the nation's CFO for the executive branch of the federal government. And Mr. Vought now is also acting head of the CFPB. The first thing he did was he told all employees, number one, we're not going to enforce anything. Number two, don't do anything. No supervisions, no regulatory examinations, no work on settlement talks with people under investigations, no investigations, period. No new guidance, no nothing. And then number three, everybody stay home this coming week. And so there's really going to be no enforcement or anything else from the CFPB, I guess, at least for the first week, probably for until future notice. Meanwhile, Elon Musk and his Doge people are at the CFPB. I assume Vought sent everybody home from the agency so that Musk and his minions could get their hands on CFPB data. To do what? We don't exactly know, although it is worth noting that Musk is trying to launch a payments processor through Twitter, which would be regulated by the CFPB in normal times, and he now will have access to all of his competitors' confidential information if they're already regulated by the CFPB. But anyways, he's down there behind closed doors doing Lord knows what. Nothing else is happening at the CFPB. And then finally, Tom, bringing us up to speed, just a few hours ago, today, Monday, February 10th, President Trump announced that he is signing an executive order putting a pause on FCPA enforcement while Pam Bondi reevaluates prior enforcement actions. I don't know what that means, and prior guidance about FCPA compliance. We can speculate on what that means too. But so Pam Bondi first said, no more enforcement of corporate bribery, only FCPA as it relates to cartels and human trafficking. Then the CFPB said that it is pausing all enforcement action until further notice. And then President Trump said, not only are we pausing FCPA and action enforcement on corporate bribery. Apparently, we're pausing FCPA enforcement full stop until further notice. So there's a lot of full stop on a lot of different regulatory enforcement issues. That's what's going on at this moment. And of course, it's only 5:45 p.m. Might be more stuff by the end of the podcast. Who knows?
That's Eastern time for those keeping score at home.
Yep.
Matt, you have written now a couple of different pieces around the pullback of the Trump administration of enforcement, where you have noted that number one, these laws are still in place. Number two, the statute of limitations will not run during the pendency of the Trump administration. And number three, there are state laws that can be enforced through these federal laws, or at least state attorney generals and perhaps even private state actors can use these laws. Does that hold true for the CFPB as well?
Yeah, so there's a lot that we should unpack here, and I can appreciate that a lot of compliance officers might feel disappointed or confused or overwhelmed about what's going on right now. I would first remind everybody that is the point. That is a big part of Donald Trump's strategy, is just to fire off so much stuff all the time right now while he can. He's doing this shock and awe, like he said he was going to do, with executive orders everywhere to overwhelm people. You're dazed and confused, and maybe you'll go along with what he is saying is true. But a lot of what Donald Trump says in the big flashy signing, or what he puts out on Twitter, we should remember, is not true. It's not accurate. So think about what is really accurate and what is really important to keep an eye on from a corporate compliance perspective. For example, regardless of what Mr. Trump might say, or the policy memo from Pam Bondi, or from the actions at the CFPB with Russell Vought, Tom, you're absolutely right. These laws are still on the books. All of the rules, for example, at the CFPB, are still on the books. And just because an agency says we're not going to enforce the law right now, that does not mean that the law itself has gone away or your duty to obey it has gone away. So even though, for example, I think the CFPB is a great example of this, even though nothing's happening at the CFPB right now, if you're a financial firm, or really any firm that might be regulated by the CFPB, because there's a surprisingly wide number who are, all the compliance duties you had to fulfill last week, you must still fulfill today, and you will still need to fulfill them in the future until such time as A, Congress changes the law, or B, the CFPB puts forth a proposal and adopts a rule to rescind a previous rule. That's the only way your compliance obligations get smaller. I can appreciate that here in the real world, your enforcement risk for not following the law is, at least right now, pretty low. But it isn't zero, and we don't know that it will remain pretty low forever. For example, Pamela Bondi, before she got bigfooted by Donald Trump today, she did say that there was going to be a pause and a temporary review of FCPA enforcement. We don't yet know exactly what Donald Trump said today. We only have press reports because Donald Trump also makes a big flashy show of what he's going to sign in an executive order, and then you don't see the text of the order for a long time. It could be days later, and the text of the order will often fill in some very key details that actually weren't included in the tweet. Wow, what a surprise. So keep in mind that we might still see some sort of, not a revival of the FCPA enforcement regime like we've known it for the last 20 years. I think it's pretty clear that Donald Trump despises the FCPA. He has been accused of violating it himself in the past. He doesn't think there's anything wrong with corporate corruption, and he thinks having the FCPA on the books puts businesses at a disadvantage. I disagree with that. We could talk about that later. But anyways, he's not going to be able to get rid of the FCPA. So if you are thinking you can violate the law right now and commit bribery with impunity, you can't. You can take a gamble that nobody's ever going to catch up with you, but is that still going to be a gamble? What if there is a new president come 2029? Donald Trump is 78 years old. What if there's a new president before that and they have a different expectation for FCPA enforcement? Your decision to blow off compliance today because you thought you wouldn't be caught could become a very painful mistake in hindsight sometime in the future. And to your point, Tom, yes, the statute of limitations at the FCPA is 5 years, so that's into 2030. The statute of limitations varies for various parts of the CF empowering law, the Consumer Financial Protection Act. A lot of it is 3 years, some of it is 1 year, some of it is unlimited. So there's a lot that goes on there. And then, Tom, I'll go pivot back to the CFPB once more is yes, everybody regulated by the CFPB, remember that state attorneys general, under the text of the statute, have the power to enforce that law on their own. That has not happened too often, although it has. Usually what's happened is the CFPB will announce a joint enforcement action with several state attorneys general, all of them together, but it doesn't have to be that way. Plus, a lot of states have their own consumer protection laws that extend into the financial services realm. So for any financial firms who are thinking, thank God the CFPB is gone, we don't have to worry about compliance anymore, totally incorrect reading of your risk profile. I would say that with the FCPA as well, if you
Let me
think,
stop you there. Let me stop you there because I want to go in a different direction of the FCPA.
sure,
The FCPA is extraterritorial law, meaning it applies to U.S. companies doing business outside of the United States.
yeah,
And the action would require a bribe being paid to a foreign official. Now, that bribe could start in the United States and be wire transferred outside the United States, but it has to be delivered in some manner outside of the United States to a foreign official. There is no country in the world which has a law saying you can bribe our government officials. That
yep,
means that any U.S. company which engages in bribery and corruption outside of the United States is violating that country's laws. And that's from Brazil, the rest of Latin America, Western Europe, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and even China.
hmm
And that would seem to me, Matt, to be a huge potential risk for any U.S. company that takes Donald Trump's words to heart and says, we will pay bribes to compete because you have now subjected yourself to foreign jurisdiction by paying a bribe and potential arrest in that country. And wherever you want to be in the world, a jail in China as an American is not one of them.
I think that is a very good point. And actually, let me draw a distinction here. I don't actually think there's a whole lot of companies chomping at the bit to say, great, the FCPA shackles are off. Let's go bribe everybody so we can kill it in the market. I don't think there's very many CEOs out there who really want to pay bribes to win business. They would prefer not to pay bribes. I also think that, especially for global companies, a lot of them are going to be thinking, great, I operate globally. I still have a whole bunch of other anti-bribery statutes now that did not exist 20 or 50 years ago when FCPA first came into being, and then the enforcement picked up in the early 2000s. They're still going to have to worry about many other countries in their jurisdictions. They're now going to have other corrupt bureaucrats who are saying, oh, great, now I can hit up the Americans for a bribe again. They've been stiff arming me for 20 years. Now I know that I can hold out and I can get a bribe from them because it's not like they're from the corrupt official's perspective. He'll think it's not true when they say they can't pay bribes. Donald Trump said they can now. No company wants to be in that position, which is why I think Donald Trump doesn't really understand how modern global business works anymore. I'm not sure he ever understood it. He's never been a terribly good businessman. Let's remember all the bankruptcies he's ever had. But Tom, I actually think back to his first Secretary of State in 2017, Rex Tillerson, who was the former CEO of ExxonMobil, who basically talked Trump out of doing this in the first term, where he said, Mr. President, you are incorrect. Having the FCPA makes American business stronger. It gives us a better chance to run real businesses and clean business, which is what we want. And so Trump eventually backed off. There's nobody like that now willing to say no to Donald Trump or talk sense into him, or I don't know if it's even possible. But nonetheless, he thinks that this is the way the world really works. So he's going to say it, that therefore it is. That's not the way it really works. I still am curious, what will the actual text of this executive order be, which we have not yet seen? But there's all sorts of reasons why large companies won't actually want to engage in corruption just because they might be able to get away with it in the U.S. jurisdiction now. It stifles innovation. It allows for flabby business companies. Businesses are just, they're not going to have to work and be the best. They're just going to have to be the ones who pay the dirtiest officials for the right things. This is going to be a corrosive effect on global business. And there's going to be a whole lot of countries who also won't like this. They're still going to enforce their statutes. Tom, let me play this out for you that let's say Donald Trump launches a tariff war against Europe. Do you really think Europe will not respond by bringing more vigorous enforcement against US companies? Of course they will. We've already actually seen that in China, where Trump imposed tariffs on China. First thing it did was open an antitrust investigation into Google. I don't know if that antitrust investigation is warranted or not. Maybe it isn't, but China specifically tied a regulatory enforcement action of a US company to Donald Trump's trade policies. So this is going to be yet another lever that other business countries might use against US businesses, is they might open anti-corruption investigations against you as a way of exerting pressure on Donald Trump and his bull in a china shop approach to trade policy. We don't know. Yeah, I mean, I'll stop there. It's random, it's impulsive, there's no logic to it, but it is what it is.
And that's why I fear for U.S. businessmen in China, perhaps other jurisdictions, who will physically be arrested under some trumped up charge. So I think the Chinese have shown they're willing to investigate a wide variety of things, and they claim their national interest. And this may just be one more of them. I think this really puts U.S. companies at financial risk. I think it puts U.S. business executives outside the United States, their physical liberty risk as well.
I think that's all true. I do think that there are still going to be legal risks. Like I said before, if somebody at the company takes a gamble to skimp on compliance now because they figure they can get away with it, then if that decision turns out to be incorrect in the future because circumstances change, who knows what might happen to your business. But really, at this point, a lot of corporate compliance should have been baked into the cake, frankly. For example, I've said many times now that it is not about just FCPA compliance. A good ethics and compliance program weaves together all sorts of anti-fraud issues because you don't want fraud at your company. But I do honestly believe most large organizations, senior executives do not want this. Because if they start going lax on one type of corruption within their enterprise, probably you'll have other types of corruption in your enterprise, and that's going to bite you in the rear end. Look, for example, at Russia and how terrible most of its companies are. They're riddled with corruption, internal and external. The companies are corrupt to other customers and other businesses and countries, but the companies are also, like the employees are fleecing those businesses blind. There's no good, strong, big global Russian company anymore. They're all dominated by the US or China or other businesses that at least try to have some sort of internal discipline. That's really what compliance is about. Internal discipline to a set of core values. And so I do think that there's still going to be a lot of incentive that compliance officers should pick up on and make these arguments to your first line of defense business leaders, to cynical CEOs who might not get it, that rolling back enforcement of anti-corruption compliance or rolling enforcement back of various industry regulatory burdens like the CFPB, just because you roll back the enforcement, your duties don't go away. The law is still the law, and that's not going to change anytime soon.
And I can't think of a better way to end this podcast.
Thank you, Tom.